Have you ever lost yourself so completely in a relationship that you forgot who you even were? It is that haunting feeling of being so desperate for love that you lose your own reflection, only to wake up and realize the person who needed saving the most was the version of you that kept settling for less. After the crash, the doctor kept insisting I was suffering from amnesia. The thing was, I remembered every single woman who had come to visit me in the hospital perfectly. The guy was supposed to be some world-renowned neurologist, yet he was dead set on the idea that I had forgotten something vital. I ended up venting to my sister about how he was clearly just trying to find problems where there weren't any. I had seen everyone I expected to see during my stay. If there was someone out there who actually mattered that much to me, why hadn't they bothered to show their face yet? My sister just stared at me for a long moment before letting out a dry, forced chuckle. She said I had a point since I had managed to recognize everyone so far, which didn't exactly scream memory loss. Shortly after my sister left, a woman in a sharp, tailored power suit stepped into the room. Her back was toward me as she pressed a phone to her ear. "Sarah, Morrison is in the hospital. Do you want to come by?" she asked. A freezing female voice replied from the other end, asking if I was dead yet, and telling her not to bother her if I wasn't. The woman let out a heavy, weary sigh after the call ended. She jumped a little when she realized I was awake, then hesitated before making her way over to the bed. "Mr. Hayes, you're awake," she said. I looked her up and down with a blank face and asked her who she was. Her face dropped instantly as she asked if I really didn't recognize her. She explained she was Mia, the personal assistant to a woman named Sarah Sterling. I asked her who this Sarah Sterling was, which made Mia look incredibly annoyed. She clearly thought I was playing games. "Morrison, cut it out," Mia snapped. "Sarah is a busy woman, so stop faking amnesia because even your little suicide stunt didn't faze her." Her words were completely baffling, and I felt more lost than ever. I just stayed quiet, not knowing how to react. Mia stepped closer, her voice dropping into a lecturing tone. She reminded me that I had been married to Sarah Sterling for 5 years. She told me I'd spent those 5 years acting out for attention, yet Sarah hadn't felt a spark for me once. She told me it was time to finally face reality. I was still drowning in confusion, but her condescending attitude was starting to grate on my nerves. I found myself instinctively loathing the look of pity in her eyes. I asked her to hold on and repeat that part about 5 years. I scrambled out of bed and rushed into the bathroom, staring at my reflection in total shock. The man in the glass was definitely me, but he looked years older than I remembered. There was a deep, permanent shadow of misery etched into the lines around my eyes. I wondered if Mia was actually telling the truth. Was I really living 5 years into the future? And was I actually a married man? My mind was stuck back when I was 18, just started my freshman year of college. Back then, I had a massive, secret crush on an upperclassman named Sarah Sterling. She was a genius who had skipped a few grades, so despite being ahead of me in school, she was actually 2 years younger. Now, for some reason, the woman of my dreams was apparently my wife. Mia explained that I had entered a whirlwind marriage with Sarah when I turned 22. According to her, the whole thing was built on absolutely nothing. Apparently, I realized too late that Sarah didn't have any feelings for me. Her heart belonged to a guy named Henry Vance, and the two of them were inseparable. Everyone said Henry was her first love. As the unwanted husband, I had supposedly spent the last few years desperately trying to ruin the marriage out of spite. I had apparently tried every pathetic stunt in the book just to get her to look at me. All I ever got from my efforts was her growing contempt and utter exhaustion. Her entire social circle viewed me as a laughingstock. They even had an ongoing bet about exactly which day we would finally sign the divorce papers. Henry Vance never even bothered to acknowledge my existence. In their world of old money and prestige, he was the ultimate golden boy. My every outburst and public meltdown was just entertainment to them. It reached a point where I supposedly threatened to end my own life just to make Sarah stop seeing him. She didn't cave, though. She told me to go right ahead and die if that's what I wanted. That was apparently when I collapsed. That was the summary of my life leading up to this hospital bed. Honestly, the idea of me trying to kill myself over a girl sounded like a joke. It wasn't my style at all. I had always despised people who threw away their lives and dignity for someone else. By the time I finished processing all this information, I had already been discharged and driven back to our master suite. Since the doctors cleared me, Mia had wasted no time bringing me back. Before she left, she gave me a look that was equal parts a threat and a plea for me to behave. She begged me not to cause any more drama. Looking up at the massive, sprawling estate in front of me, any urge I had to act out vanished instantly. I was floored by the sheer opulence of the place. The walk-in closet alone was bigger than the entire studio apartment I remembered living in. As I was busy inspecting the lavish bedroom I supposedly shared with Sarah, I heard the door handle turn. I whipped around and found myself staring into Sarah Sterling's icy gaze. Even though technically we had been married for half a decade, she felt like a stranger to me. This was the first time I was seeing her up close since losing my memory. I had to give it to my younger self. There was a damn good reason I had put her on a pedestal all those years ago. Just looking at her made me feel better for some strange reason. Even with her expression frozen in a cold mask, I couldn't bring myself to feel any real anger toward her. She frowned when I didn't say anything to her. "Morrison, what is it this time?" she asked. She didn't even slow down as she brushed past me toward the closet. She reached out and snagged a silk robe without looking back. I turned to face her and asked what I could possibly want. I pointed out that I hadn't even opened my mouth yet, and she was already accusing me of causing trouble. Sarah's dark eyes locked onto mine as she noted that I usually practically threw myself at her the moment she got home. She asked if this was some new game I was playing to get her attention. I was actually a little embarrassed to hear that I had been such a clingy husband. I pushed the shock aside and told her as calmly as possible that I wouldn't be bothering her like that ever again. I expected her to look relieved, but she actually looked even more annoyed. She gave me a look of pure, unadulterated frustration. She told me her job was exhausting enough without having to deal with my childish games. I decided it was best to just stay silent. Sarah's eyes turned razor sharp as she warned me to leave Henry Vance alone. She told me he was innocent and made it clear that she wouldn't fall for another suicide threat. I just stood there as a wave of complicated emotions washed over me. Mia had already given me the rundown on my messy history with Sarah. When you boiled it down, it was just a pathetic, cliched story. I was in love with Sarah, and Sarah was in love with Henry. I had been the sad little clown in the middle, trying to sabotage Henry behind his back. The only thing I had achieved was making my own wife hate me more every day. Apparently, this whole suicide attempt was triggered by my jealousy over how much Sarah favored Henry. I had supposedly tried to ruin his business by smearing his reputation to his clients. Sarah hadn't even blinked before taking Henry's side. She had publicly defended him in front of our entire social circle. By doing that, she had basically told the world that our marriage was a sham and that I didn't matter to her nearly as much as Henry did. I had obviously snapped and tried the most desperate move possible to win her back. It was pretty clear how well that had worked out. Sarah finally gave up on me when I didn't respond and walked into the bathroom. I let out a long, shaky breath and collapsed onto the massive bed. My thoughts were spinning in circles. Without the last 5 years of memories, I couldn't wrap my head around how I had allowed myself to become this unhinged. At 18, I had nothing but contempt for people who lost their minds over a relationship. Yet here I was, the very same guy, apparently willing to end it all over a woman. I never imagined I could sink this low. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out my next move while my mind raced. Suddenly, the covers were pulled back and a warm, soft body that smelled faintly of perfume slid in next to me. The scent was both hauntingly familiar and completely foreign, making my heart skip a beat. I looked over and found myself staring directly into Sarah's intense, searching eyes. I asked her what she was doing. Given how much we supposedly hated each other, I assumed we would have been sleeping in separate wings of the house by now. I couldn't understand how she could just crawl into bed with me, so casually. She didn't seem to notice that I was stiff with discomfort. A moment later, she was leaning over me. Her long, graceful fingers began to trace lines across my chest without even a hint of hesitation. The The sensation was an overwhelming, unfamiliar rush of adrenaline. I found myself calling her name and telling her to stop. The look of absolute rejection in my eyes was impossible for her to miss. She actually looked genuinely stunned for a second when I pulled away. Her shock didn't last long, though. It was quickly replaced by her usual irritation. She told me to stop being difficult. Her tone of voice was like nails on a chalkboard. Even her beautiful face, the one I had worshipped for so long, was losing its appeal in that moment. I pointed out that I was still her husband and that she hadn't offered a single kind word since I got home. I asked her why she thought she had the right to just come in and start yelling at me. My anger seemed to set her off as well. She snatched my wrist and told me in a voice as cold as ice that I was only suffering because of my own actions. She wasn't squeezing that hard, but her fingers landed right on the raw, tender skin of my stitched wrist. I sucked in a sharp breath of air, but refused to give her the satisfaction of hearing me cry out. Sarah suddenly let go, as if she had lost interest entirely. She rolled over and turned her back to me, telling me that she was letting it go this time, but warned me never to fake my own death for leverage again. I lay there next to her in silence, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and anger. By the time I opened my eyes the next morning, she had already left the room. I threw on some clothes and headed downstairs to find her already halfway through a quiet breakfast. The butler gave me a respectful nod and wished me a good morning. I lingered at the bottom of the stairs for a moment. Sarah didn't even look up from her plate as she told me to come sit down and eat. The spread on the table was absurdly lavish for a simple breakfast. This family was clearly loaded. They turned a Tuesday morning meal into a five-star event. I took my seat across from her. The butler set a bowl of sago pudding in front of me with perfect timing. I just sat there, not really knowing what to say. I wondered what kind of grown man ate pudding for breakfast. Then the scent of mango hit me, and I pulled back, asking why there's fruit in the bowl. The butler gave me a polite smile and explained that Henry Vance had personally sent them over. He mentioned they were Henry's favorite variety, flown in especially from overseas. Whatever hunger I had felt a moment ago disappeared instantly. I told them I wasn't hungry and suggested they finish without me. Before I could get up, Sarah looked me in the eye and told me that enough was enough. The fuse I had been trying to keep short finally blew. I asked her if my personal food preferences were now a crime. She accused me of refusing to eat only because the gift came from Henry, then asked when I was finally going to get over my jealousy. Sarah looked at me with those cold, judging eyes. Was I really that jealous of Henry Vance? I had no idea how pathetic my 27-year-old self had been, but just the thought of it made me feel sick. We were supposed to be husband and wife, yet she apparently had no clue I was deathly allergic to mangoes. I was about to point that out when the butler announced that Henry Vance had arrived. A smooth, cultured voice drifted into the room as a tall, handsome man appeared in the doorway. He asked Sarah if he was interrupting anything. Every member of the staff greeted him with a warmth and familiarity that made it clear he was a frequent guest. I didn't need to be told who he was. One look at him, and I knew I was looking at Henry Vance. The hierarchy in the house was obvious. Even though I was the master of the house on paper, the staff called me Mr. Hayes while they addressed him by his first name. It was clear who they actually liked more. It was easy to see why my older self had become so obsessed with the guy. Even though we were legally married, she made it abundantly clear that I couldn't hold a candle to the man she actually adored. Henry looked my way, wearing a mask of fake concern as he asked how my wrist was doing. I let out a sharp snort, not even bothering to hide my disgust. I could only imagine what a pathetic doormat I had been in front of them, throwing away my pride for a woman who didn't want me. My mind was back in my 18-year-old self's shoes. I wasn't in love with Sarah anymore. She was just an old crush. There was absolutely no reason for me to keep letting them treat me like garbage. Henry played the victim and looked at Sarah with a pained expression. He suggested that maybe he should leave since I clearly didn't want him there. I called him out on his nonsense, asking why he bothered showing up if he knew he wasn't welcome. I asked him if he was just here to gloat, which turned his face a deep shade of crimson. Sarah snapped at me to stop being difficult. It was obvious whose side she was on, and it wasn't mine. A wave of bitterness hit me, and whatever respect I had left for her was starting to fade fast. Waking up and finding out I was married to the girl of my dreams had felt like winning the lottery at first. Now, I was realizing that no amount of beauty or money could make up for a toxic personality. I was fuming, but Henry kept up his perfect gentleman act. He invited Sarah to his celebration party and added, as an afterthought, that I was welcome to join if I felt up to it. I had zero interest in going until I caught that quick flash of mockery in his eyes. He was daring me to show up. I let out a cold smile and told him I'd love to come. I pointed out that as Sarah's husband, I shouldn't miss such an important event. I ended up tagging along with Sarah to the party. The second the three of us walked into the VIP lounge, every eye in the room was on us, their faces filled with judgmental smirks. The room was filled with the low hum of gossip, just loud enough for me to catch the occasional insult. I scanned the crowd and realized these were all their wealthy, high society friends. I could see why my older self had lost his mind. Dealing with these people and their constant snide remarks every day would drive anyone to the edge. I must have been truly, pathetically in love with Sarah to put up with this kind of emotional abuse for so long. Sarah and Henry went ahead and took their reserved seats, leaving me standing in the middle of the room like a total outsider. Someone whispered about how awkward I looked, and another person replied that I'd probably crawl on my hands and knees just to be near Sarah. I looked the speaker dead in the eye and asked them why on earth I would kneel to her since she wasn't exactly a saint or dead. The guy looked shocked that I had actually stood up for myself. Sarah jumped in immediately, her voice dripping with annoyance as she told everyone to drop it. She didn't even try to defend me. She just wanted to avoid a scene. I let out a dry laugh, told them it was clear I wasn't wanted, and turned to walk out. I didn't even look back as I made my exit. I could hear them whispering in shock behind me, wondering if I had actually just walked out on them. They wondered if Henry had finally broken me. The noise was giving me a headache, so I headed out to the pool area to get some fresh air. Henry appeared a few minutes later, telling me that I was full of surprises today. I checked to make sure he was alone before asking if he was worried I'd throw him into the water. Henry just chuckled and said he knew I didn't have the guts to do it. He added that even if he did fall in, Sarah would choose him over me in a heartbeat. I looked away, finished with the conversation. Since I was ignoring him, he decided to move even closer. Henry asked if I wanted to make a bet. I told him I didn't get why they hadn't gotten married, yet if they were so perfect for each other. I asked him if he really thought building a relationship on someone else's misery counted as love. That actually seemed to shut him up for a second. He claimed the only reason she was still with me was because I was holding her hostage with my pathetic suicide threats. He said she only felt sorry for me. He quickly put back on his charming mask and asked me again if I was man enough to take the bet. The pool looked peaceful and shallow, but I knew exactly how dangerous it could be. I told him no way. Everyone knew I couldn't swim, and I wasn't about to risk my life twice in 1 week. I stood up to leave, but I saw a flash of frustration in his eyes. Before I could move, he lunged forward and shoved me into the water with everything he had. There was a massive splash followed by a chorus of screams. My body slammed into the cold water, and I started sinking immediately. For a second, the world went silent. I was filled with the pure terror of being dragged under. I felt the freezing water fill my lungs, and my chest felt like it was being crushed. I thrashed around blindly, desperate to reach the surface. I managed to open my eyes and saw a familiar figure dive into the pool, but she was swimming away from me. It was my wife, Sarah. We had both gone in, but she didn't even look my way as she swam to save Henry. I felt a sharp pang of pain that had nothing to do with the water. That must have been the last bit of love my older self had for her. Even without my memories, my body still remembered how much she meant to me. This time, however, I let that feeling drown right along with me. By the time I opened my eyes, someone had dragged me out of the pool. Henry and I were both safe. Sarah had saved him, but my savior was a woman I didn't recognize. She was striking, I had to admit. I was flat on my back while she knelt over me, performing CPR. Each press on my chest felt like a hammer, forcing the water out of my lungs. I started coughing violently, my vision swimming as I gasped for air and spat out a lungful of water. Sarah finally decided to come over, while Henry stood by her side, doing his best impression of a worried friend. Sarah looked like she had just remembered she actually had a husband. She looked down at me with a frown and asked if I was okay. I ignored her completely and tried to push myself up. The woman who had saved me tried to help, but I brushed her off. When Sarah stepped closer, I felt a surge of rage and almost slapped her. I couldn't bring myself to hit a woman, though, so I grabbed her by the arm and shoved her away instead. Sarah lost her balance and landed hard on the ground in front of everyone. The entire place went deathly quiet. I could literally hear the people around us gasping in shock. A woman like Sarah Sterling had probably never had a hand laid on her in her entire life, let alone been pushed to the ground in public. I told Sarah right then and there that I wanted a divorce. I told her I didn't want a dime from her. That shove was all the compensation I needed to walk away. I stared down at her with a heart of stone. My older self had probably spent years dreaming of the look on her face in this exact moment. I expected her to be furious or devastated, but honestly, I realized I didn't care anymore. Whatever she was feeling didn't matter to me. The crowd was reeling. The man who had spent years following Sarah around like a lost puppy had just shoved her to the ground and demanded a divorce in front of everyone. Sarah scrambled to her feet and started toward me, but I felt such a wave of loathing that I reflexively stepped back. I told her that our tab was settled with that one shove and asked if she was really that petty. She didn't say a word, but she grabbed my wrist and tried to drag me out of there. During the struggle, another hand clamped onto my other arm. It was the woman who had pulled me out of the pool. She gave me a quick look before turning her attention to Sarah. With a mocking smile, she suggested that Sarah might want to be a little more careful with a man who had almost just died. She was my savior, and she was the exact opposite of Sarah Sterling. If Sarah was a polished, unreachable ice queen, this woman was a wild, untamed flame. Sarah snapped at the woman, calling her Jessica and telling her to mind her own business regarding her husband. Jessica didn't seem intimidated at all and just kept grinning. Jessica pointed out that she had just heard me ask for a divorce, which made the tension in the air even thicker. Jessica just laughed in the face of Sarah's murderous glare and asked if Sarah was ever going to thank her for saving her husband's life. Sarah's face softened just a fraction as she offered Jessica full control over the massive Westwood project as payment. Then, without another word, she dragged me away. I could hear the people behind us whispering in disbelief. They couldn't believe Sarah had just handed over a multi-million-dollar contract like it was nothing. Sarah dragged me straight to the hotel. She was notoriously elitist and refused to stay in any room that had been occupied by someone else, so she kept the entire top floor as her private suite. She didn't say a single word as she hauled me into the bathroom and started the water. As I sat in the warming tub, I watched her and felt nothing but pure annoyance. I asked her to leave, but she just gave me that same dark look. She told me she was my wife and that she had every right to be there. I was about to get out of the tub when she suddenly turned around and came back toward me. I had no clue what her plan was, and it made me nervous. A second later, she threw her entire weight onto me, wrapping her arms around me like iron bands. She was clinging to me as if she would never let go. Just as I was about to lose it, she whispered into my ear, her voice tight with emotion. She told me she was just glad I was okay. I told her to get off of me in a voice that was cold as ice. I reminded her that Jessica was the one who saved me and asked her what right she had to act concerned now. I told her I would never forget seeing her swim toward Henry while we were both drowning. We had gone down together, but she only had eyes for him. I was actually grateful for the amnesia. If I had truly remembered how much I loved her, that betrayal probably would have destroyed me. I reminded her that she had made a choice to save Henry, knowing I couldn't swim. I told her flat out that I'd be a corpse if it weren't for Jessica. After a long, heavy silence, Sarah finally managed to stammer out an apology. She promised it would never happen again. I told her that words were cheap and that we were done. Once the divorce was final, she could spend the rest of her life saving Henry for all I cared. She told me she knew I was upset, but claimed I didn't have the full story. She then made it clear that she wasn't going to give me the divorce. I laughed in her face and asked her why she thought she had a choice. I reminded her that she had already proven Henry's life was more valuable to her than mine. I told her I wasn't backing down and that the marriage was over. She looked incredibly frustrated, but she seemed to realize that I had every right to be furious. She suggested we just go to sleep and talk in the morning. I told her to get her hands off me and not to make me get physical. I gritted my teeth and grabbed her in a way that I knew would catch her off guard. Her face turned bright red instantly, the blush spreading down her neck. She told me to stop acting out and promised to make it up to me. I felt a sharp, throbbing pain start to bloom in my head. I could only imagine how pathetic I must have been for her to think she could just sweet-talk me into forgiving her after everything she had done. I clenched my fists and shoved her away again. Her expression went cold instantly as she lunged forward and pinned me down. She told me if I couldn't sleep, she'd find another way to tire me out. She leaned in for a kiss, but I felt the color drain from my face. A blinding pain sliced through my head like a hot knife, and I broke into a cold sweat instantly. I let out a low groan as my entire body began to tremble. She asked if she was hurting me, and for a split second, the look of terror in her eyes almost convinced me that she actually cared. I reminded myself that a woman who would let me drown wouldn't give a damn about a few scratches on my wrist. I just bit my lip and stayed silent. The sharp metallic scent of blood suddenly filled the room. Sarah looked down at the hand she was gripping, then stared at the bandages around my wrist. She had obviously thought I was just acting for sympathy. Her face went pale as she slowly started to unwind the blood-soaked bandages. The white fabric was completely saturated with fresh blood. Her eyes went wide when she saw the deep gash underneath, and she whispered my name in horror. I stared at her with a cold heart, ignored the searing pain, and yanked my arm away. I asked her if she was finally happy with what she had seen. She looked absolutely furious and asked who gave me the right to try and end my life. I stared her down and asked her if she actually gave a damn one way or the other. I could see my words hitting home like physical blows. She flinched, and I caught a glimpse of genuine fear in her eyes for a split second. The doctor didn't come alone. Henry Vance was right on his heels. He had already showered and changed, and his hair was perfectly styled as usual. He hovered in the doorway, acting all worried and asking how I was. Sarah just gave him a curt nod and told him to go home, saying she had things under control. Henry let out a fake sigh and claimed he couldn't live with himself knowing I had almost died because of him. I cut him off mid-sentence, telling him his acting was top-notch. I then mentioned how convenient it was that the pool area didn't have any cameras. I told him I was dying to know what Sarah would think if she knew what he had whispered to me right before he shoved me into the water. Henry turned as white as a sheet. He stammered out some weak excuse and practically ran out of the room. He was probably used to causing chaos and then letting Sarah's blind devotion fix everything for him. My bluntness had completely caught him off guard. He knew that if he stayed any longer, his little secret was going to come out. Sarah stared at me for what felt like an eternity after the doctor left. She finally told me to get some rest and promised to be back in the morning. I told her that was fine, but insisted she bring the divorce papers with her. I warned her that if she didn't have them, I have my own legal team handle it. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, but her voice remained cold. She told me to forget it, because a divorce was never going to happen. I tried to unlock my phone with my own birthday, but it didn't work. I tried Sarah's, and the screen swiped open instantly. I couldn't help but laugh at how pathetic I had been. I immediately went into the settings and changed the code back to my own birthday. I called Jessica Westwood the next morning and got straight to the point. I introduced myself and asked if she was free to grab a coffee. "Mr. Hayes, what can I do for you?" Jessica asked. Her voice was low and had a playful, teasing edge to it. I told her I wanted to thank her in person for saving my life at the party. I truly couldn't understand how my older self had let a woman turn him into such a desperate, low-life loser. "Morrison, level with me," she said. "We've been friends for a long time, so you can talk to me." I was stunned to hear that we had a history. She told me I was acting completely different since the accident. She asked me if this new personality was some kind of reaction to Sarah. I let out a dry laugh and noted that even she could see the change, yet my own wife was oblivious. I told her that was just more proof that the marriage was a dead end. I asked her if she thought I had a good enough reason to leave now. I took a slow sip of my coffee while I waited for her answer. She shook her head and said she never thought she'd hear the word divorce come out of my mouth. She reminded me how pathologically obsessed I used to be with Sarah Sterling. She said I had been a total simp when we first got married. Apparently, I used to follow her everywhere and would pick a fight with any guy who even looked in her direction. She told me I had ghosted all my old friends for Sarah, especially the women. She admitted she had to work incredibly hard to get into Sarah's social circle just to see me. "Morrison," she said, leaning in, "if you've realized you made a mistake with her, I'm more than happy to help you fix it." Suddenly, Sarah lunged at her, and the two of them were scuffling on the floor. It was the first time I had ever seen the poised Sarah Sterling lose her cool like that. I had never seen two grown women get into a physical fight before. I had zero interest in getting caught up in their middle school drama. Sarah told me she'd be picking me up from the office. I glanced at the fresh bruise on her cheek, but she just looked away and told me not to worry about it. I told her she was flattering herself if she thought I was worried. I saw the pain in her eyes for a second, but she quickly masked it. "Morrison, you know you can't sleep without me," she whispered. I felt a chill run down my spine. It sounded like something out of a nightmare. I read Henry's post about how they were meant to be, and I couldn't help but laugh at the sheer audacity of it. I opened my contacts, found Sarah Sterling, and blocked her on every single platform I had. She tried to unlock my phone and got an error message. She looked at me with a frown and asked if I changed the code, and I told her I did. "You don't remember, do you?" she asked, her eyes searching my face like a hawk. She stated flatly that I had amnesia. She told me I had simply forgotten the depth of my feelings for her. That was her new excuse for everything. She claimed I'd stop asking for a divorce the second my memory came back. Honestly, the way she said it made my skin crawl. "Morrison," a voice said from the shadows. I jumped and demanded to know how long she'd been there and how she had gotten a key to my place. "Sarah, looking at you makes me sick," I said. "And honestly, I hate the man I used to be just as much." Dr. Riley tried to tell me I was being too harsh since Sarah had apologized, but Sarah cut her off before she could finish. I told Jessica I was grateful for her help, but that I didn't have feelings for her. She gave me a look of fake heartbreak and asked why I had to be so blunt. Sarah suddenly turned and stumbled away, clutching her mouth as she started to retch. Jessica's eyes went wide as she asked if Sarah was pregnant. It all came back to me, the reason I had reached my breaking point. Sarah had looked me in the eye and told me she never wanted to have children with me. I told her I didn't want anything she had to offer. Not her money, not her cars, nothing. Sarah's eyes started to fill with tears. I told her she didn't have to do this. We both knew that neither of us was a saint in this relationship. Henry asked me if I knew Sarah was pregnant with my kid. He let out a deranged laugh and demanded to know why it had to be me. I saw the glint of steel in his hand and realized he was holding a knife. He wasn't just talking, he was actually trying to kill me. When I opened my eyes, I saw Sarah standing in front of me. The blade was buried deep in her chest. I screamed her name as loud as I could, but she was already slipping away. I told her to stay quiet and stay with me. She whispered that if she didn't make it, I should just find a way to move on without her. I told her to stop talking like that. I was so terrified I could barely breathe, thinking that this might be the last time I ever saw her face. Henry tried to blame me for everything, but Mrs. Sterling didn't want to hear it. She shut him up with 2 hard slaps to the face. She told him that I was her son-in-law and that if he wanted to get to me, he'd have to go through her first. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I sat there next to her bed, staring at her pale face. I leaned in and whispered that I was sorry for everything. They told me she was pregnant and that the baby would be okay as long as she managed to pull through. In a voice that was barely a whisper, she told me she wasn't going to let our kid call anyone else Mom. Even at death's door, she was still making demands. She begged me for another chance and told me how much she loved me. She held on to me like she was never going to let go. I finally told her the truth, that I couldn't go back to being the man I used to be. I told her that all of my jealousy and insecurity could have been avoided if she had just been honest with me from the start. She took my hand and pressed it against her chest. She asked me if she had finally passed her probation period. I laughed and told her she had, though I might keep her on it for a little while longer. She asked me exactly how long she was going to be on trial. I told her the term was for the rest of our lives. You see, real strength is not about carrying your scars like a burden for the rest of your life. It is about finally having the guts to stand up and say that you refuse to ever be that pathetic version of yourself again, the one who lived without an ounce of dignity. Perhaps we all deserve the chance to have a little amnesia and forget the toxic people who made us feel like we were nothing. We need to wipe the slate clean and let go of the past so we can finally learn how to love someone while standing on our own 2 feet.